There is a place in the world where the rules break down. Not the rules that men write and argue over in heated rooms. The deeper rules, the ones written into the bones of wild things over thousands of years of survival. The rules that say a predator behaves this way, that a pack moves according to this logic, that a wolf hunts within the boundaries of what wolves have always done. In Alaska, those rules are breaking. And the wolves doing the breaking have no idea they are doing anything unusual at all. They are simply surviving, simply adapting, simply becoming something that the people who have spent their entire careers watching them are no longer able to fully anticipate or explain. If you have ever stood at the edge of a wilderness and felt the particular silence that means something is watching you, something that understands the terrain better than you ever will, then you already know a little of what we are talking about. That feeling is not paranoia. It is the oldest, most accurate alarm system ever built. It is what your ancestors felt when wolves were not a subject of study, but a fact of existence, a force moving through the darkness just beyond the firelight. But what is happening in Alaska right now goes far beyond anything your ancestors encountered. Because the wolves here are not just hunting, they are innovating. And if you stay with us through this entire story, we promise you that by the end, you will look at the wilderness, at predators, at the very concept of animal intelligence, in a way you never have before. Subscribe now if you want to keep coming back to stories like this one, because what follows is one of the most remarkable things happening in the natural world today, and it is happening right now, in real time, in the frozen forests and open tundra of the largest state in America. Let us begin at the beginning, not with the wolves themselves, but with the land that made them. Alaska is not a single place. That is the first thing to understand. It is an accumulation of completely different worlds, pressed up against each other with very little regard for human convenience or expectation. There are coastal rainforests in the southeast so dense that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor, where the trees grow so tall and so close together that a person can become completely disoriented within 100 meters of the tree line. There are mountain ranges in the interior that dwarf anything in the contiguous United States, peaks so remote that they have never been climbed, valleys so isolated that the wildlife within them has essentially been evolving in a separate experiment from the wildlife on the other side of the ridge. There are river systems so vast and so intricate that mapping them accurately took generations of surveying, and there are still tributaries that do not appear on any chart. There is the Arctic slope, where the land flattens into a kind of emptiness that is not really empty at all, but is in fact one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth during the brief explosive summer, teeming with life in quantities that are almost impossible to believe unless you have seen it. And through all of this, through the rainforest and the mountain passes and the river deltas and the tundra, wolves move. They have always moved through it. Long before the first human beings arrived on this continent, crossing from Asia during the ice ages when the land connection still existed, wolves were already here. They were already hunting, already organizing themselves into the complex social structures that we now study with such fascination, already developing the behavioral repertoires that would allow them to survive in conditions that kill unprepared humans within hours. The wolves of Alaska did not need human beings to study them in order to refine their methods. They were already masterful, already sophisticated beyond what most people give them credit for. But something is changing, something that even the most experienced biologists, the people who have dedicated decades of their lives to following these animals across impossible terrain, tracking their movements, recording their behavior, building up databases of pack dynamics and hunting strategies that represent some of the most detailed behavioral science ever conducted on a wild predator, something that even these people are struggling to categorize. The wolves are doing things they are not supposed to do. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what wolves are supposed to do. And that means understanding something about how science approaches animal behavior. For a very long time, the dominant model was relatively straightforward. Animals behave according to instinct. Instinct is shaped by evolution. Evolution is a slow process measured in geological time. Therefore, animal behavior within a species is largely predictable within a given range of conditions. There is variation, certainly. Individual animals differ. Populations in different environments develop different specific techniques. But the underlying structure of how a wolf hunts, how a pack coordinates, how decisions are made within the group, these things were assumed to be stable, knowable, predictable within a reasonable margin. That assumption is being tested in Alaska right now, and it is not passing the test. The Denali wolves were among the first to attract serious scientific attention in the modern era. Denali National Park, which contains the Alaska Range and the highest peak in North America, is one of the few places in the world where large predators can be studied in something approaching their natural state, without the constant interference of human settlement, agriculture, or hunting pressure that has distorted predator behavior everywhere else. The park has been the site of some of the most ambitious long-term wolf studies ever conducted. Researchers have spent years there, some of them decades, building up an understanding of how the packs in that ecosystem function. And what those researchers began noticing, slowly at first and then with increasing urgency, was that the wolves were changing their hunting strategies in ways that did not fit the established models. Consider what a wolf pack is supposed to do when hunting caribou. The textbook version is relatively well understood. The pack identifies a herd. They test the herd by approaching, watching the animals react, identifying any individuals that are slow to respond, that move awkwardly, that show any sign of weakness or injury or age. This testing phase is critical. Wolves are not machines that simply launch themselves at the nearest large animal. They are evaluating, making collective judgments, minimizing the risk to themselves while maximizing the probability of a successful kill. Once a target has been identified, the pack pursues, using a combination of sustained speed and coordinated positioning to cut the target animal away from the herd or to tire it over distance. The kill itself involves specific techniques that vary somewhat with the size and nature of the prey, but the general structure is consistent. That is the textbook. That is what wolves are supposed to do. What the researchers in Denali started observing was different in ways that were initially subtle, but that accumulated into something that could no longer be dismissed as individual variation or simple chance. Packs were making choices during hunts that did not align with the established risk minimization model. They were, in some cases, bypassing what appeared to be vulnerable individuals to pursue what appeared to be healthy ones. They were shifting their pursuit vectors in ways that seemed to anticipate where the prey would go, rather than simply reacting to where it was going. And they were doing something that caused real consternation among the researchers. They were splitting their hunt across time, initiating an engagement, breaking off, and then returning to complete the pursuit hours later, in some cases on the following day. This last behavior was particularly disturbing to the established models because it implied something that the textbook version of wolf cognition was not supposed to accommodate. It implied planning that extended across a significant temporal horizon. It implied that the wolves were not simply responding to the conditions of the hunt as it unfolded moment to moment, but were thinking, in some functional sense, about outcomes that existed in the future. Now, we need to be careful here. The language of animal cognition is a minefield, and anyone who has spent time in this field knows how easy it is to anthropomorphize in ways that generate exciting narratives but poor science. The researchers were careful. They were rigorous. They examined alternative explanations. Perhaps the break in pursuit was simply the wolves giving up and returning opportunistically when they happened to encounter the same prey animal again. Perhaps the subsequent engagement was coincidence. Perhaps the coordination observed was less sophisticated than it appeared. But the data kept accumulating, and the alternative explanations kept failing to account for what was being recorded. There was one pack in particular, designated by researchers according to the clinical convention of numbered identifiers, but informally called the East Fork pack by the people who watched them most closely, that produced a sequence of observations so unusual that the lead researcher involved described them, in a paper that was notably restrained in its language, as representing behavioral flexibility beyond what current models predict. Over a period of 3 winters, this pack was observed engaging in a coordinated hunting strategy that involved the systematic use of terrain in a way that went beyond anything previously documented. They were, in essence, herding prey toward specific geographic features, not just chasing and reacting, not just pursuing along whatever path the fleeing animal chose. They were driving. They were using the landscape as a tool, positioning themselves in ways that limited the options available to their prey, funneling movement toward river bends or cliff edges or ravines where the terrain itself would do part of the work. This is not unprecedented in the wolf literature. There are historical accounts and some modern observations of wolves using terrain tactically. But what made the East Fork pack's behavior remarkable was the scale and consistency of it. This was not an occasional opportunistic use of landscape features. This was a systematic, repeatable strategy that the pack deployed across multiple hunts, across multiple prey species, across varying conditions of snow depth and temperature and prey density that would have required continuous adjustment and recalibration. The researchers were observing, in real time, what appeared to be cultural transmission of a sophisticated behavioral strategy within a wolf pack. The older animals were not simply modeling behavior that the younger wolves copied through direct imitation. The strategy required genuine coordination, genuine communication, genuine shared understanding of a spatial plan that extended across hundreds of meters and could not be completed by any individual animal working alone. How were they doing it? The short answer is that we do not fully know, and that uncertainty is itself one of the most important things to understand about what is happening with Alaska's wolves right now. Wolf communication is far more complex than most people realize. The howling that most people associate with wolves is really only the most obvious and dramatic element of a communication system that operates across multiple sensory channels simultaneously. Scent marking is extraordinarily information-rich. A wolf reading a scent mark left by another wolf is receiving a complex packet of data about the identity of the animal that left it, its physiological state, its reproductive status, how recently it passed, and potentially information about what it had recently been doing and what direction it was traveling. This is not metaphor, this is biochemistry. The olfactory processing capability of a wolf is so far beyond human experience that it requires an act of genuine imagination to even approach understanding what it would be like to navigate the world through that kind of sensory information. Add to this the body language vocabulary of wolves, which is intricate and subtle, and capable of conveying information that primatologists might struggle to attribute to anything other than deliberate communication. And you begin to understand that when a wolf pack is coordinating on a hunt, they have access to channels of information exchange that human observers with binoculars and radio telemetry data simply cannot fully intercept. We are watching the output. We are watching what they do. We are not always able to determine how they decided to do it. And that gap between observable behavior and underlying process is where the most interesting and most troubling questions live. Because what the Alaska data is suggesting is that the process is more sophisticated than we thought. That the wolves are not simply running a behavioral program that was written into them by evolution and is now being executed according to a fixed algorithm. They are, in some meaningful sense, thinking, problem-solving, and the solutions they are generating are new. Move west from Denali, and the character of the landscape changes dramatically. The vast interior lowlands of Alaska are a world of black spruce forests growing out of permanently frozen ground, bogs and fens that in summer become nearly impassable, river systems that braid and braid again across flat plains that stretch to every horizon. This is moose country. The largest member of the deer family, moose are among the most formidable prey animals on Earth. An adult bull moose can weigh over 600 kilograms. Its legs are weapons. A kick from a moose can and does kill wolves. They are not passive prey. They are dangerous opponents, and hunting them successfully requires not just coordination and persistence, but genuine tactical sophistication. The wolves of the interior lowlands have been hunting moose for as long as wolves and moose have coexisted in this landscape, which is a very long time. The basic techniques are known. The winter hunts on lake ice, where moose cannot maneuver effectively and wolves can run freely. The pursuit through deep snow that exhausts the prey. The testing of animals in fall when hunting conditions are different from winter. These are the established strategies. But researchers working in the lowlands have been documenting something in recent years that does not fit neatly into any of these established categories. They have been watching wolves hunt moose in the rain. This sounds simple. Of course wolves hunt in the rain. Wolves hunt in all weather conditions, but that is not what is remarkable about what the researchers are seeing. What is remarkable is that certain packs appear to be deliberately changing their hunting strategy when it rains, not simply continuing their normal behavior in rain, as in any other weather condition, actually modifying the approach, the timing, and the structure of their hunt in response to rainfall in a way that suggests they understand something about how rain affects the sensory world of their prey. Rain, in sufficient volume, produces a kind of sensory masking effect. It generates noise across a broad frequency range that interferes with the ability of prey animals to hear approaching predators. It washes away scent. It reduces visibility in complex terrain. For a moose, which relies heavily on its extraordinary hearing and on its ability to detect scent from considerable distances, rain is a degraded sensory environment. It is harder to know what is coming. The wolves appear to know this. What has been documented is that certain packs, during rain events, shift their approach behavior. They move faster, with less of the cautious testing approach that characterizes hunts in clear, calm conditions. They close the distance to prey more quickly. They seem willing to accept less confirmation of vulnerability before committing to an active pursuit. And the success rate of these rain hunts, compared to hunts conducted in the same territory under calm, dry conditions, is significantly higher. The question is what this means. One interpretation is relatively conservative. Wolves, over evolutionary time, have been rewarded by successful hunts during rain conditions, and this has shaped an instinctive behavioral shift during precipitation. This is not planning. It is not understanding. It is simply a behavioral program that was written by natural selection and that runs automatically under the right conditions. But this interpretation has a problem. The behavioral shift is not uniform across all wolves in a given area. It is found more strongly in some packs than in others, and the packs that show it most strongly are, in several of the cases that have been studied, packs that have experienced specific learning events, packs that have had particular successes during rain events earlier in their history. Packs where older, experienced hunters are present. This suggests that what is being observed is not purely instinctive programming being run automatically, but learned behavior that has been acquired through experience and transmitted within social groups. Which brings it much closer to the territory of culture, much closer to the territory of knowledge. And knowledge is something that we have long been reluctant to attribute to wolves in any meaningful sense. There is another behavior that has been observed in Alaska's coastal wolf populations that has caused even more disruption to the established models. Because these wolves are not just changing how they hunt the prey they have always hunted. They are hunting prey that wolves were not supposed to be able to effectively hunt at all. The coastal wolves of the Alexander Archipelago, the chain of islands that runs along the southeastern coast of Alaska, are a genetically distinct population. They have been isolated from interior wolf populations for long enough that they have diverged in measurable ways, including, most remarkably, in their diet. Where interior wolves are specialists in ungulates, in moose and caribou and Dall sheep, the island wolves have become dependent on salmon and other marine resources to an extent that has astonished researchers. This was known. This was documented. Wolves eating salmon is not a new observation. Salmon are enormously abundant in coastal Alaska during spawning runs, and the energetic value of a spawning salmon, which has accumulated enormous fat reserves during its ocean feeding phase, is genuinely significant. It makes sense that wolves in an environment where salmon are available would utilize them. What was not predicted, what has emerged from recent years of more intensive observation, is the sophistication of the techniques these wolves have developed for acquiring marine prey that goes far beyond simply wading into spawning streams and grabbing salmon. Some of the island wolf packs have been observed hunting harbor seals. Let that sit for a moment. Harbor seals are marine mammals. They are fast in the water in ways that no wolf can match. On land or on ice, they are capable of moving with surprising speed, and they are acutely sensitive to the approach of predators, with well-developed sensory systems and the constant option of retreating into water where no wolf can follow them effectively. They are not the kind of prey that a wolf hunting in the conventional mode would be expected to successfully target. And yet the observations are there. Video footage, researcher accounts, tracks in the tidal mud, the physical evidence of kill sites in the intertidal zone. Wolves of certain packs have learned to hunt seals. And what they have learned is not a crude, opportunistic approach. It is a technique. It involves using the terrain of the shoreline, the rocks and kelp beds and tidal features, in ways that limit the seal's access to water. It involves approach angles that exploit the seal's sensory blind spots. It involves, in at least some documented cases, what appears to be cooperative positioning between multiple wolves that cannot be explained as coincidence. One researcher who has spent years studying these coastal wolves described watching a sequence of events that she struggled to categorize within any conventional framework for predator behavior. Two wolves approached a group of resting seals from different directions simultaneously, timing their approach in a way that cut off the most direct routes to deep water before the seals could detect either animal. The seals that escaped did so by moving away from both threats, toward shallow water where one wolf was waiting. The hunt failed in the end, the seals managing to reach sufficient depth to escape, but the structure of the approach was unmistakable. 3 wolves, 3 coordinated positions, a spatial plan that required all 3 animals to understand not just their own role, but the roles and positions of the other 2. This is not supposed to happen. Not because wolves are not intelligent enough, but because this kind of prey, this kind of environment, this kind of hunting structure sits so far outside the evolutionary heritage of the wolf that the conventional models had no mechanism to account for it developing within the timescale of modern observations. Unless the timescale of learning is much faster than the models assume, this is where the science becomes genuinely uncomfortable for some researchers. Because if wolves can develop genuinely novel hunting strategies for genuinely novel prey types within the span of a few generations, within the span of a few years of intensive observation by researchers who started their fieldwork expecting to find the behaviors the textbooks predicted, then something important is happening that the textbooks are not adequately capturing. The wolves are not evolving in the biological sense. They are not developing new instincts through natural selection operating over the hundreds of thousands of years that evolutionary processes normally require. They are learning, they are innovating, and they are transmitting what they learn within their social groups in ways that are fast enough to be visible in real time within the careers of the scientists studying them. This is cultural evolution, and it is happening in wolves. The implications of this go well beyond Alaska, well beyond wolves, well beyond any specific question about predator behavior. Because if cultural evolution in the sense of socially transmitted behavioral innovation that changes the functional capabilities of a population can happen in wolves at this pace, then we need to fundamentally rethink what we assume about the behavioral flexibility of wild animals in general. We need to rethink what predators are capable of becoming in response to changing environments. And Alaska's environment is changing faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. This is the context that gives everything else meaning. The behaviors the researchers are documenting are not happening in a stable system. They are happening in a system under intense and accelerating pressure. Alaska is warming at roughly 4 times the global average rate. The permafrost that underlies enormous areas of the interior is thawing, which is changing the hydrology of entire river systems, which is changing what grows where, which is changing where prey animals can live and how they move through the landscape. Sea ice, which has historically structured the ecology of coastal and near-coastal areas in ways that affect everything from marine mammal distribution to the movements of salmon, is forming later and breaking up earlier each year. Snow conditions, which have profound effects on the movement of ungulates and therefore on how wolves can hunt them, are shifting in ways that are still being characterized but that are already detectable in the behavioral data. The wolves are responding to a world that is changing around them faster than it has ever changed in the history of their species. And they are responding not just with the slow adjustments of biological evolution, which operates over far too long a timescale to be relevant here, but with the fast adjustments of learned behavior and cultural transmission. They are, in the most fundamental sense, adapting. Not as individuals only, but as groups, as packs, as something approaching communities of knowledge. In the Brooks Range, the enormous mountain chain that runs east to west across the northern interior of Alaska above the Arctic Circle, there is a pack that researchers have been tracking for 11 years. The tracking combines aerial surveys, GPS collar data from collared individuals, remote camera networks, and ground-based observation during the summer months, when conditions allow field researchers to operate in the range. This pack, which occupies a territory in the eastern Brooks Range, has been the subject of one of the most intensive long-term wolf studies currently active in the state. Over the 11 years of this study, the pack's core behavior has gone through 3 distinct phases that do not correspond to any environmental event that the researchers have been able to identify as a simple explanatory trigger. In the first phase, the pack hunted Dall sheep in the conventional manner that has been documented for Brooks Range wolves across the literature. High-elevation pursuit, testing of individuals at the edges of bands, preference for terrain that limited the sheep's ability to use the rocky cliff faces that are their primary defensive resource. Normal, predictable, consistent with everything that had been observed in similar populations elsewhere in the range. In the second phase, beginning approximately 4 years into the study, the pack began showing a pronounced preference for caribou over Dall sheep, despite the fact that caribou availability in their territory had not significantly increased. The shift appeared to be preference-driven, not availability-driven. The researchers could not initially explain it. Over time, through painstaking analysis of kill data and movement patterns, they developed a hypothesis. A change in the pack's composition, specifically the arrival of a female wolf from a different pack through dispersal, appeared to correlate with the beginning of the shift. This female came from a population with a strong caribou hunting tradition, and the researchers began to suspect that she brought that tradition with her. that her presence in the pack introduced a different knowledge base, a different set of practice techniques, and that this knowledge spread through the pack through exactly the kind of social learning and cultural transmission that the coastal seal hunting observations were pointing toward. The third phase is the one that has the researchers most puzzled. In the last 2 years of the study, the pack has begun making movements that do not correspond to any prey availability gradient the researchers can identify. They are moving out of their established territory, not in pursuit of caribou or sheep or any other prey animal that the collar data suggests is present in the direction of movement, but apparently toward specific locations in the landscape, for reasons that the researchers have not yet been able to determine. One hypothesis is that these movements represent a new foraging strategy for a food source that the remote cameras and aerial surveys are not capturing. Perhaps they are exploiting something at very small spatial scales, small mammal populations or bird colonies or some other resource, that the study's existing methodology was not designed to detect. This is the most conservative and most scientifically cautious interpretation, and it may well be correct. But the researchers have not been able to confirm it, and in the meantime, they are watching wolves make decisions that they cannot predict and cannot explain, which is an extraordinary place for scientists who have spent 11 years building what they believed was a comprehensive understanding of this pack's behavior to find themselves. It is also, in a strange way, a kind of gift, because the inability to predict is itself information. It is telling you that your model is incomplete, that reality is more complex than your theory. And in science, that realization, uncomfortable as it is how knowledge actually advances. The question of whether wolves are intelligent in a meaningful sense has been debated for decades, often with more heat than light, because it gets tangled up in questions of what intelligence actually means, whether it requires consciousness, whether it requires language, whether it requires abstract reasoning, or whether functional equivalents of these things in non-linguistic, non-human minds should be given the same name. What the Alaska data is suggesting does not require settling any of these philosophical questions. Whatever we call it, whether we call it intelligence or flexibility or cultural learning or behavioral innovation, the wolves of Alaska are demonstrating a capacity for adaptive response to novel challenges that exceeds what the established models predicted. They are solving problems that their evolutionary history did not specifically prepare them to solve. They are doing so through a combination of individual trial and error, social observation and learning, and the transmission of successful innovations through social structures that appear to function as genuine information networks. This is happening because the world is demanding it of them. The environment is changing, the prey base is shifting, the conditions of the hunt are different from what they were a generation ago, and different again from what they will be a generation hence. And the wolves that are surviving, the packs that are maintaining their numbers in a landscape that is genuinely changing beneath their feet, are the ones that are most effectively generating and transmitting new behaviors. Natural selection, operating at the level of cultural transmission rather than genetic inheritance, is favoring wolves that learn, wolves that teach, wolves that are, in the deepest functional sense, smart. There is a wolf in the southern portion of one study area, a large male whose collar data has been collected for going on 7 years now, who has become something of a minor legend among the researchers who follow him. He has been informally named as field researchers inevitably name their long-term subjects, and his behavioral record is one of the most unusual in the Alaska wolf literature. This animal has been documented using at least 6 distinct hunting strategies across the course of the study period. Not 6 variations on a single strategy, 6 structurally different approaches to acquiring prey, each suited to different prey species, different terrain conditions, different pack compositions, and different seasons. He has been observed hunting alone and in groups. He has been observed hunting in ways consistent with the traditional models for his region and in ways that deviate from them substantially. He has been documented in a kill sequence that involved an apparent feint, a maneuver that led prey in one direction while positioning himself in another, which is either a genuinely sophisticated deceptive strategy or a remarkable coincidence, and the researchers who watched it happen are divided on which interpretation is correct. What is not in question is that this animal's behavioral record does not fit a single consistent profile. He is not running the same program again and again. He is drawing from a repertoire. He is making choices. And the choices he makes in one context are different from the choices he makes in another context, in ways that suggest genuine situational assessment rather than automatic execution of fixed routines. This is what the biologists mean when they say they can no longer predict these wolves. They do not mean that the wolves have become random or chaotic. They mean that the model of wolf behavior they are working with is not adequate to account for the full range of what they are observing. The wolves are operating in a behavioral space that is larger than the space the models describe. There are dimensions of their behavior that the models do not capture, and the researchers are now in the process of trying to build better models, trying to find theoretical frameworks that can accommodate behavioral flexibility, cultural learning, and genuine innovation alongside the more established elements of wolf behavioral ecology. This is genuinely difficult work because it requires integrating fields of research that have historically operated separately. It requires bringing together wolf ecology, animal cognition research, cultural evolution theory, and the rapidly evolving field of environmental change biology in ways that none of these fields has traditionally had to engage with each other. The researchers doing this work know that they are at the beginning of something, that the observations being accumulated in Alaska are going to require years of additional work to fully analyze and interpret, that the theoretical frameworks needed to make sense of what they are seeing do not yet fully exist and will need to be developed from the ground up. But they also know something else. They know that what they are watching is important, not just as science, not just as data points in behavioral ecology, but as a window into something profound about the nature of life, about what living things are capable of when the world demands more of them than the script they were given by evolution. There is a moment that one researcher described in a conversation that stayed with her for years afterward. She was in the field, positioned on a ridge in the Brooks Range at first light, watching a pack through a spotting scope as they moved across a valley floor below her. The light was coming in low from the east, gold and sharp, the kind of light that makes everything look significant whether it is or not. The pack moved with the fluid coordinated ease that always strikes observers, that quality of unified purpose that makes a wolf pack feel like a single organism rather than a collection of individuals. And they stopped, all of them, simultaneously, not in response to any stimulus she could identify, not because prey had appeared on the horizon or because another predator had come into view. They simply stopped, and then, after perhaps 30 seconds of stillness, they turned, all of them, in a direction that was not the direction they had been heading, and began moving with what she described as new purpose. Purposeful in a different way, deliberate in a way that suggested something had been decided. She followed them with the scope for the next 4 hours. They traveled several kilometers in that new direction, across terrain she would not have predicted based on their established movement patterns. And at the end of those 4 hours, they made a kill, a successful hunt, efficiently executed in a part of their territory where she would not have expected them to find prey on that day, based on everything she knew about that landscape at that time of year. She could not explain what had happened in those 30 seconds of stillness. She could not explain how they had known to change direction. She could not find in the data any signal that should have told them what was in that direction, how far away, or how to get there. She could only record what she had observed, which was that the wolves knew something she did not. Something about their world, about the immediate possibilities within their landscape, that her instruments and her training and her years of experience had not given her access to. This is the position that the researchers find themselves in, not defeated, not confused into paralysis, but humbled, genuinely humbled in the way that good science should humble the people who practice it, reminded that the world is larger and more complex and more interesting than any model of it. The wolves of Alaska are not following a script. They never were, exactly. But the degree to which they are departing from the script that the science had written for them has become impossible to ignore. They are hunting in ways that could not have been predicted from the established literature. They are coordinating in ways that imply information sharing of a richness and sophistication that we do not yet fully understand. They are adapting to a changing world with a speed and a flexibility that challenges fundamental assumptions about what non-human animals are capable of. And they are doing all of this not in a laboratory, not under controlled conditions where variables can be isolated and hypotheses tested cleanly, but in the vast, complex, indifferent wilderness of Alaska, which does not care about our models or our predictions or our assumptions, which simply continues to be what it is, demanding whatever it demands of the things that live within it. The great gray wolf, which has walked this continent for longer than our species has existed anywhere on Earth, which has survived the end of the Pleistocene and the extinction of the megafauna and the expansion of human civilization and the systematic persecution of predators that characterized most of the last 2 centuries, is doing what it has always done. It is finding a way. It is becoming what the moment requires. It is solving the